All right, thank you for tuning in to the Pangburn Philosophy Podcast. This is Travis Pangburn. Today I am overjoyed. I have one of my heroes on the line with me. The amazing James Randi is on the line. For those of you who don't know, James Randi has an international reputation as a magician and escape artist, but today he is best known as the world's most tireless investigator and demystifier of paranormal and pseudoscientific claims. Randi is a pioneer of the modern skepticism movement and a hero of mine, and thank you so much for talking to me today, James.
Great pleasure, Travis. And how have you been, health-wise and activity-wise?
Hey, I've been doing pretty good. I'm in the gym 3 times a week. I'm traveling the world. I'm trying to eradicate anti-science wherever I can. I'm trying to follow in the James Randi footsteps, if that's even possible.
Well, if there's a spray or something like that, like mosquito spray, that we could perfect, I think we should all arm ourselves with that. But it's pretty hard to find out where these people are. You know, they're under the furniture like spiders, and they seem to want to avoid immediate contact. We have to do something about that.
Yeah, and we have a bit of a culture now that tries to force those people into hiding, which I don't think is a helpful thing. Like I'm so in favor of putting bad ideas on stage with reasonable minds so that they can be worked out and we can potentially see some concessions happen live in front of an audience.
Very true. Very true. I agree.
And I wanted to start with how are you health-wise? How are things going?
Well, I've had a few rough spots in my life. After all, I am just a few days short of being 90 years of age. And I'm supposed to be dead by now, but I've refused to go along with that notion. And I think if I do that successfully for long enough, I may get to be immortal. I didn't say immoral, I said immortal.
That's well, I'm so glad you're still with us, James, and it was one of the biggest pleasures of my life is when you came down to Vancouver and I got to spend some time with you, and we went to the to Science World together, and we shared a couple milkshakes, and then you spoke at the Chan Center for Performing Arts in Vancouver about magic and skepticism, and I was just so privileged to be a part of that event.
I like the way you say, I came down to Vancouver.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of...
For me, it's up, you see.
Yes, right. Yeah, I guess I say that because I grew up way up high in the mountainous regions of British Columbia, and for me, Vancouver's always down, and I think it's just something I need to shake. It's a hole in my reasoning.
Yes, okay, we have to do something about that.
Yes. So here's a question. Is the world more skeptical than ever before, or are we reverting?
Well, I think there's an interesting angle to that, Travis. I think that we have more groups now, organized groups, who are taking the subject more seriously and organizing against belief in the paranormal and the supernatural. I don't know whether that's just a delusion of my mind. I don't write anything off. I can have all kinds of delusions and rather enjoy them, as a matter of fact. But I must say, I think that it's a little more organized now, and we've got many groups out there, and I'm sure you could name them off very rapidly as the same way I could. And they're all over the world, in all different continents around the world, and I'm in touch with a great number of them, and I get to speak to them every now and then, and I'm encouraged by the fact that they seem to be much better organized than they had been previously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one obvious source would be the Richard Dawkins Foundation. Yeah, and I know you speak very highly of Richard. What can you tell me about your interactions with Richard and what he's meant to your process?
Well, I've actually stayed at Richard Dawkins' home, if you can imagine that. That's outside I shouldn't give a location for it because everyone will start to look it up, you see.
Right.
But it's, let's say it's in the UK. That's vague enough, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I had such a wonderful time at his home. He had some marvelous artifacts in his home, and I was really quite taken with it. I was carried away by it, as a matter of fact, and that experience lasted me a long time. Now, that was several years ago, and I've been in touch with Richard since. He had a bit of a stroke,
Yes.
and that was not welcome at all. Of course, I'm against strokes.
Me too.
And I'm not talking golf now.
Yeah. I think all of the ideological belief systems on this planet, at least as far as I could tell, are against strokes. So we all have that in common.
Okay. I'll make a note of that. So, okay, I just made a note of it. Yeah, Richard is, of course, a figurehead in the skeptical field, and I've known him for many, many years. I don't quite know when I met him, but I have been on so many stages with him, and been introduced by him and with him and for him, that we're old buddies, I guess.
Yeah, and what do you think? He's been very effective in demystifying a lot of people of faith, and helping them find their way out of religions. That's been an important part of what he's done in modern times. But he's also been, I think, one of the most influential scientific minds in the past, at least 150 years. So, and what do you think is special about the way Richard delivers science to the public?
Well, I think because he's authoritative. I've often seen him speaking and been sitting in the front row, and I this may just be my imagination, but when he gets a question, which he gets almost every time that he steps on stage, and that can be any one of 40 questions, of course.
Right.
But when he gets something like that or a mention of something, I think I see him winking at me in the front row because it's something that speakers like Richard and myself, and you too, I'm sure, in your work, you have to be very patient with people, and don't start out by saying, this is a question I'm always asked. No, don't do it that way. Just raise your eyebrows very slightly and express a certain amount of surprise at the introduction of the subject, whatever it may happen to be. And Richard is very good at that. As a matter of fact, I've always admired one thing about him above all. When he gets a question that he's not accustomed to getting from an audience member, he will pause and even defocus his eyes. I'm sure I don't stare into his eyes all the time, but he takes a minute, not a minute, he takes 30 seconds perhaps to think about the subject, and the answer he gives is so cogent, it's just frightening almost. He sounds like he's reading from a textbook.
Right.
He's not. He's just reading from his memory, from his mind. And often, well, very often, he gets a round of applause for one of those particular kinds of answers. And he certainly deserves it. And he deserves our support in every way that we possibly can.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I have lots of events coming up with Richard, and the way I see him affecting audiences, even today, it's people are always so quick to shoot up to give him a standing ovation after any discussion he's involved with, because he brings so much to the discussion.
Yeah, very true, very true. And he's a teacher after all. And, well, not anymore, but he he'll always be a teacher. I'm sure that he can't even unwind his tongue long enough to have to think about that. Um, he's a remarkable intellect, and he almost speaks as if he's reading from a text. And I'm rather jealous of that ability.
Yeah, he's one of those people who can author on the fly, and like you said, it's
Yes.
like he's reading from a book he's written, but he's just taking the time to put the to reason, I guess, is the best
Yes,
way to describe
and
that.
I think more speakers, not of Richard's caliber, of course, but more speakers, I think, in the business of explaining themselves from a stage would do well to put a pause in there when they're about to answer a question they don't get that frequently.
Yeah.
And I think, I hesitate to say this, but I may be copying from him. And if so, I'm copying from a giant.
Yeah.
And he is one of my giants. One of, I'd say, 6 or 8 people that I consider to have been a great example for me.
Right. Who would be some of the other ones that have been a big source of inspiration for you?
Well, this is difficult for me now. What's the name of the chap that he travels with a great deal?
Lawrence Krauss?
Lawrence Krauss.
Yeah.
Larry, forgive me. I forgot your name for a moment there. And maybe we can edit that. But Lawrence Krauss. And the beautiful thing about Larry Krauss and Dawkins, when they speak as a pair, and I've witnessed this several times, luckily, and it's just such an experience to see the two of them playing off one another and with one another to help one another along. And I've seen them doing lectures where I see 3 of them in a row, for example, and I see the same sort of moment arrive in their speaking duties. And I've seen different answers come out from them. And I see Dawkins occasionally looking mildly astonished, and then he breaks into a quiet smile, and I know that he's caught up with it. So, and this is giving away secrets of how people approach their audiences, of course, but I don't think they'll mind.
Yeah, I don't think so either. So is there a certain pseudoscience that existed when you were younger that is still around? And if so, if you can think of any, can we shake it, or is it just always going to be around?
I think that, well, when you say when I was a child, for example, that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
And it's getting to be a longer time as days go by. But no, I don't think so. I think that there are certain standards, astrology, for example. This can be so easily dumped on. It can be so easily just written off the list by using a certain amount of logic, and just ask people how they think that stars that are millions, in some cases billions of miles away from them, and just tiny dots they're not tiny themselves, but they're tiny dots in the heavens above. I often even feel that I should speak to them and say, well, why did you get this reputation of being, if Arcturus is in a certain spot in the sky, how did you get the reputation of having some useful knowledge in that fact? Astrology, I think, is just the most daffy notion.
Yeah.
Now we're using slang, I think, but a word like daffy really applies to it, I'm sure. Astrology is so easily demolished by just using some common sense. But common sense, now theirs is an expression that I don't hear as often as I should. If you have a certain note of common sense, you're just applying logic to a situation, to a circumstance that requires it, and it fits into place so beautifully. I'm proud to say that I've had several moments of revelation for myself when someone will mention a subject like astrology, or fortune telling, or card reading, or whatever, that fits so nicely into what I need to address. And I hope that I do a good job of it. I like to think that I do, and I've been told by applause and by just the general circumstances that I probably do get a good enough reaction. And I'm finding also that I must say this too, that at my advanced stage, I tend to wander a little bit in on subjects and in directions, and sometimes I can get led astray. I just get having a favorite angle come up to me, and often those things happen to me when I have people in the audience who will hang around after the listening audience, if I'm at a film, for example, and I hope it's one of mine. And I find that there's a strange thing that has happened more and more often recently, and that is, we call them the stragglers. Now, I usually go to my speaking engagements with my partner, Davey, and we'll exchange glances at one another. If we notice that the audience is filing out and waving goodbye over their shoulders or whatever, and we see that some people are not leaving, they're coming down towards the front of the stage. And often they're crying. They're crying because we've said something to them that has hit a spot. I don't know where that spot is. I don't know that I could locate it anatomically. But you get people who look up at you with tears in their eyes and will say things like, "You just made a big difference in my life. I have to think about this more now." Oh, that's a great moment of victory.
Yeah.
When you find out that you've actually reached somebody down deep and gotten them thinking about it. And very often I will get tremendously long letters, which I read with great joy, from people who have come to the foot of the stage and said to me, "I didn't know about that," or I'll pay attention to that from now on. That's what I want to do. I want to leave an impression with people. I want them to react to what I have had to say. I don't ask them to believe everything I say. No, I have all kinds of crazy ideas that they would probably not agree with at all. But on the other hand, they gave me a chance to address them. And that's the most I can ask of them. And I have to pay them back by giving them very good answers.
Yeah, and I mean, you've and even in the circumstances that they're not coming down to the front of the stage, just people who are still watching your content, young people online on YouTube, seeing all of the content from back when you used to do the show, and you know, all of your talks that are online that people can access. Like you have this effect in people's home all the time, and it's millions upon millions of people who have been affected by your work, and that's got to be satisfying for you.
Well, I must tell you of an event that happened to me many years ago now, many years ago. I was going to say when I was young, but It could, hey, it couldn't be that far back. But I was doing the lecture circuit, traveling out of New York mostly, and I was doing very well with it. And Harry Blackstone, Harry Blackstone, the great Blackstone, the Blackstone. Um, Harry Blackstone lived at the Royalton Hotel. Now, that's a residential hotel, or was in those days, a residential hotel in the heart of Manhattan. And he had chosen to live there with his wife. And he, well, strangely enough, his wife didn't share his philosophy at all. She used to get up very early in the morning and looking a little bit tatty, perhaps, and she'd head out of the house. And if I was visiting Harry at that time, and I might be, because I lived in Manhattan at that time, and he would look at me and say, "Oh, she's off," and she would come back a bit later, sort of from a different angle in the apartment, and go to the bedroom. I'd hear the door click shut, and we wouldn't see her for the rest of the day. We'd go out for lunch, and we'd meet some of our fellow magicians in various parts of Manhattan, and we'd have a great time. But we'd forgotten about her altogether. She was a believer in certain things that we found it hard to accept, and I won't get into all the details of it. But Harry would give a great sigh, and he would say to me something like, "Here she goes again."
Yeah.
And this she was not a bad person, not at all, but she just didn't understand, and she certainly didn't share any of our philosophy about tricks and trickery and deception of the public. But I must tell you that they moved away, the Blackstones themselves, they moved away to Hollywood, and they lived for quite some time in Hollywood, and I understand he was a great attraction at the Magic Castle, if you might imagine. And I was just so disappointed to see Harry disappointed that she couldn't share his philosophy.
Right.
And that hurt me, and I'm sure it hurt him, but he smiled a lot. And he was, in his retirement, he was a different person altogether. He didn't have the obligations to carry on as a magician. He didn't need to at all. And he had certainly a few wealthy supporters who voluntarily gave him enough cash to carry on,
Right.
and without having to worry about where his next meal was coming from.
Yeah.
But he said to me one day, we were sitting down. I remember the air conditioning, for some reason, had failed this particular day, so we were out on the balcony, and he leaned forward in his chair, and he said something to me, Travis, that I will never forget. I'll never forget the event and what happened following it. He said to me, one of these days, he said, now you're well established in magic now, speaking to me, and he said, I know you think you've been through everything, but one of these days you're going to beat an audience. And I looked at him, unknowing what he was talking about. I was used to coming out ahead in a discussion, but he said to me, oh, don't look at me that way. And I'm sure it was a strange way in which I did rear at him at that point. And he said, one of these days you'll work before an audience that is so inimical to you just can't handle them. You can't conquer them. can't quite beat them. He said, in that case, just see it through, but speak in a low voice. Now, that is one thing that stayed with me. And I found out that worked very well, because not more than a week after that, I was out on a club date at a high school, and I was told by the manager of the high school, he said, don't worry if the audience doesn't pay much attention to you. They don't like magicians. And they told me a long time. Now, that's not too unlikely an occasion. But they don't like magicians, and they will boo and they will hiss and they will carry on. And I thought, okay, maybe I'll use something that can beat that situation. And so when I walked out on stage, and you get the usual hisses and boos and whatnot, and go home and this kind of thing.
Yep.
And I just spoke in a low voice, not this low, but low enough that they had a hard time hearing me. And some people in the audience said, shh, 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 you just said so-and-so. And I got them quietened down, and then I said to them, in a perfectly ordinary voice, I had a microphone with me, but in a perfectly ordinary microphone voice, I said, now, when I first came out here, you made a terrible noise. You were noisy and boisterous, and you didn't want to hear what I had to say at all, but I got something to show you here. Now, there was one number in my act that I still remember with great fondness, and it involved a Reader's Digest or another magazine of that kind, and I would give it to quietly at one side of the room while the audience is coming in. I'd give it to one usually young lady, and I'd ask her to go over in the corner and simply select a word there and remember that word. And she had remembered it, and she'd say, okay. She showed it at me, and I'd go back over there and say, don't show it to me now. Just tear that page out of the book and fold it up and put it in your purse. She said, oh, okay. And I said, I will try to tell you that word later on. And she said, oh, that's impossible. And which I like to hear too. And so later on in the show, I would say, there was a young lady I spoke to in the audience here. Oh, there you are. Stand up, would you please? And then I would go through a routine, and I would end up having a big drawing on a big, big pad. I'd have them get me a big, big drawing pad. And it didn't make any sense. It had lines going backwards and forwards all over it. And I'd say, this doesn't seem to make much sense. I'm trying to tell the young lady the word that she was thinking of. Wait a minute. And I would go down to the lower corner and tear up the whole sheet and show it to the audience. And they would see that I had actually gotten the word, but I got it backwards, written backwards completely and upside down. And there would be a pause, and whoa, that usually would win any audience.
Yeah.
And it did for years. But when I did it this particular time, they actually came up and sat me on their shoulders. That big football player decided to put me on his shoulders, and he marched around the stage with me, and I couldn't do the rest of the show. And I went back to my dressing room, and I sat down, and I said to my reflection in the mirror, well, I made something out of that, though it started out badly, and then suddenly it occurred to me, that's what Harry Blackstone was trying to tell me at the Royalton Hotel.
Huh.
That's what he was trying to tell me, that I would have those. And I went right back to New York. I was due to go back anyway the next day. And I bust in on him early in the morning, and he was just going out to breakfast. And I told him the whole story. And he grinned. I think he broke his face. To tell you the truth. He just grinned from ear to ear, and he said, "Yeah, sure, I told you, didn't I?" And but he was smiling all the way through it, and that was a great satisfaction to me, and I never forgot that experience with Harry Blackstone.
Wow, that's amazing. Like some of those moments that you just never forget, and we have them from childhood, and I'm sure you've had so many in your life like that.
Oh yeah, well, this one was particularly important to me because Harry had told me about this, and he died not long after that. And I've always had a great memory. I have a picture of him on my wall right here in my home, as a matter of fact. Harry Blackstone. What a magical name. What a magical
So speaking of people passing on, people dying, what's the thing you'll miss most about living on Earth?
Well, I don't know whether I'm going someplace else.
Yeah.
But I rather doubt that. I think that's a bit of a myth, but we won't get into that. I think to save our souls from damnation, something like that. I don't know. I'm very satisfied with the life I've lived. Not totally, no, not totally. I made some boo-boos along the way, and I had to pay for them in one way or another, with inconvenience and loss of reputation and a few things like that. But I've kept my head pretty well together, and I think that when I close my eyes for the last time, I'm not trying to encourage that, but I think that when I do, I'll probably be smiling. And if you come upon me at that point, make sure that you curl my lips up a little bit. Okay?
I guarantee you. Yeah, that's amazing to hear. I mean, that's something, when my time comes, I'll want to be able to look back at my life and smile for sure.
Yeah. If we can do that, I think we've had a winner.
Yeah. Let's finish with this question. What would be the most important piece of knowledge that you could give to future generations?
Well, it depends on what kind of an audience I was speaking to. If I was speaking to magicians, it would be one thing. If I was just speaking to a lay audience, it would be another. But to magicians, I would say always stay true to yourself. Tell them what you really think, and if it's not what I really think, I don't mind all that much, because I'm satisfied that I've got the right answer. But I would ask you to work on it a little bit. And if you're talking to a lay audience, you have them in a theater in most cases, and it's astonishing. But I must tell you this too. This is something which I'm having a little more often now. I'll have people who will come up to the front edge of the stage, as I said previously, up to the front edge of the stage, and they really want to embrace me and kiss me and the whole thing, and I'm not for all that goo-goo stuff. Got to be careful.
Yeah.
Because I'm such an attractive person that they can't resist it. But when I meet those people, I'll often follow them down the aisle and buttonhole them in the lobby and maybe take them out for a cup of coffee or something like that, and have a bit more of a chat with them. And those chats are often so rewarding, Travis, I can't tell you. that's what makes up my life from now on. I think I'm going to taper out this way, and I think it's a life well lived. I have no complaints about it. It wasn't perfect, as I said, not at all, but it was as close to perfect, I think, as I could ever get it. And speaking of close to perfect, when are we going to get together again?
Hey, we need to do something. I want to, do something close to your place so you don't have to do a lot of traveling. But maybe we could do something in New York or something along those lines soon. But we got to do something, and I know there's so many young people that want an opportunity to chat with you and talk to you. So I think we need to set some stuff up for sure if you're available and willing.
Oh, I'm willing. I'll only be available if I'm dead. Not available if I'm dead. Right? Got that wrong. Yeah. I've got to have a little more discipline in my speech here. But it's been a pleasure hearing your voice again, Travis. Yes. And I remember that we did some good work.
Yes.
Yeah, that was fun, and I hope to repeat that. So
yes.
Let's work to that end.
Yes, for sure. Let's do it. And everyone, this has been the amazing James Randi. And James, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
A great pleasure. And the screen here might be broken because I haven't been able to see you. But no, I guess not. I'm on a computer here with a screen. I don't see myself at all, and I don't see you. But we'll do what we can, okay?
All right. Well, thanks, James. And everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. This has been the Pangburn Philosophy Podcast, and let art and science inspire.